Paul Tillich, the theologian, he had this method called correlationism, where he started with a problem, and then he looked at potentially how to address that, and correlated for him Christianity to the existential human condition. So I'm kind of doing a form of that. I'm starting off with the existential human condition. I'm trying to articulate something very basic that's connected to us as human beings. And you'll see how I build on that throughout the day. But what we've simply looked at and what I've simply said is death comes to us, the end of life. Death is the end of life. That's one thing. That's concern to some of us. Some of us can flee that, escape it, ignore it, come to terms with it. But there's also this death within life. And death is a name for nothingness, and nothingness is a name for lack. And lack is a nothingness that is something. Right? There's two types of nothingness. Not having money is a lack. Is not having. If you don't have money, you don't have money. You're missing something. Money. I don't have any money. If you have debts, that's a nothingness that is something. That is a lack that ties you to jobs you don't want to do, that makes you have to work places you don't want to work, to be tied to institutions you don't want to be tied to. So not having money is a type of nothing. You don't have money. Having debts is a form of nothingness that is something. And interestingly with debts, so debt is a lack of money. We think we can pay the debts, right? Or maybe we can sometimes pay a debt. To pay a debt is to fill the lack. You have a lack of money, you pay the debt, you fill that lack, right? If someone forgives a debt, you don't pay it. Forgiveness of a debt is fundamentally different from the payment of a debt. Very, very important. To forgive a debt is to say the nothingness is nothing. Right? Is to render the nothingness nothing. To render the nothingness that is something into a nothingness that is nothing. So in other words, you don't pay it, you don't get rid of it. You say that nothingness that binds you, we render it nothing. The year of Jubilee was not the payment of debt. It was the forgiveness of debt. Two very different things. Very, very important when it comes to theology, because a lot of places you'll hear about the payment of debt. What I'm going to explore is the forgiveness of debt. So anyway, we have this lack that's within us, and I expressed it in multiple ways. There is the separation I feel between myself and other people, and I inhabit that. There's a way of thinking about yourself that is at the between you and other people, because other people influence who you are, they influence your life, they're part of you. So there's that distance. The difference between who you are and who you'd like to be, between what you have and what you would like to have, which expresses itself, of course, in everyday life of, I don't have the job I want, I don't have the partner I want, I don't have the life I want. And again, if I have a relationship with you, I don't just have a relationship with what you have, I have a relationship with what you want to have, because that enters into your life in terms of frustration or in terms of desire. So I relate to you both in what you have and what you would like to have. And then I also mentioned we also live in this very difficult space between having to act and not knowing what to do. And the name for living in that space can be called anxiety. Anxiety is technically the fear of nothingness. It's the fear of nothing, but it's the fear of nothing. Fear is fear of something. If you're frightened of lions or something like that, so you're afraid of something. Anxiety is the fear of nothingness itself. Anxiety is the experience of living in the in-between. And so that's a technical kind of term for anxiety. And what we often do with anxiety is we concretize it into an object. So a phobia is a way of controlling anxiety. You have a generalized anxiety, so you put it into mice. A mouse can't really hurt you. A mouse is not something to be frightened of. So it's probably a symbol of something. We put our anxiety into an object and we say, that's the problem there. And that object prevents you from looking at your own anxiety. This is how fascism operates generally. Fascism is, in a sense, the scapegoat mechanism. A community says, we would be better, whole, complete, if only the Jewish community didn't exist. The figure of the Jew is the problem. But actually, the figure of the Jew is the very thing that allows the fascist community to have a modicum of solidarity and connection. In other words, you think that they're the problem, but they're the solution to a problem. If you got rid of the Jewish community, you wouldn't have a community that works. The fascist community would then realize that they've just put all of their anxiety and brokenness onto something else. That's what a scapegoat is. It's putting all of your own anxiety, all of your own inner turmoil onto another and thinking that they're the problem. And then, of course, you need the scapegoat, because the scapegoat allows you to protect yourself from looking at your own anxiety. There's a story very quickly about Seamus again, who lands on this desert island. Basically his plane crashes. He's there for 20 years. Nobody else on the island, completely alone. So he builds a house and all of that. Eventually he's rescued. And before they take him off the island, someone says, show us where you lived. So Seamus brings him to this clearing, and there's 3 buildings. He says, oh, that building there, that's my house. Oh, very good. What's the building beside it? Oh, he says, I'm a very religious man. He says, that's my church. I built that to go and pray, to read my Bible. I said, oh, very good. What's the building beside that? He says, I don't want to talk about that. Oh, come on, what's the building beside that? I don't want to talk about it. Come on, what's the building beside it? Oh, he says, that's the church I used to go to. Terrible place, right? In other words, you have to somehow put your anxiety onto some other, rather than look at it in yourself. That's why we always want to create new communities that are, in a sense, without the shadow. We want to create the new Eden, the place without the darkness. They're the baddies. But that's a way of scapegoating, of refusing to see and wrestle with your own anxieties. And the problem we face as human beings then is, how do we live in that space? What we do is we try to deny it, and that's what a symptom is. A symptom is, in a sense, what you refuse to speak, finding a way to speak. So, you're maybe kind of got the perfect life, everything's great, you're projecting out your idealized ego, all of that, but you have terrible migraines, right? You have a bad back, you find it difficult to sleep, you always have to listen to something at night in order to sleep, and whenever it switches off, you wake up sometimes because, now the repressed returns. These are symptoms. If you're denying something to yourself consciously, your body finds a way of expressing it. Symptoms are a protest against a form of life that doesn't work. And we often think that symptoms are things that we can just cut out of our body. I have outbursts of anger. I cry for no apparent reason. I have migraines, bad back. They can't figure out what exactly is wrong, right? And we think, okay, if only I take the right medication, if only I do the right, rituals or whatever, I can get rid of these symptoms. The symptom is seen as not really part of me. But in analysis, the idea is, no, the symptom is more you than anything else. The symptom is your truth. The truth that you cannot face is expressed in the symptom. And so the symptom, kind of in a sense, often is whenever you're in a church, for example, and you're reading Josh McDowell Evidence That Demands a Verdict, and you've got all of the answers and you've got it all right, and you feel this confidence, but you're not able to express your doubt, your unknowing, because what is doubt? Doubt is a lack of knowledge. Doubt is living in the center. You can't express that, so it will come out. Maybe it will come out in aggression to people who don't agree with you, that you find yourself unable to disagree with people, you find yourself hating people who disagree, or keeping yourself away from people. These are symptoms. Symptoms that are telling you not that you're confident, but that you lack confidence, but you're not able to express that. That's why my first book was about doubt, complexity, and ambiguity in the church. Because what the argument was not that we have to doubt. I was on this radio show where this guy was at, he had an apologetics show. He talked about apologetics 3 days a week. He'd written like 10 books on apologetics. And he was saying to me, are you telling me that we have to doubt? We have to ask questions about our faith? And I'm saying, I'm not telling you that at all. I'm telling you you're already full of doubt. Why else would you have a show 3 days a week on apologetics and have written 10 books on the subject if you weren't flooded with questioning that you're not able to express? I'm not your psychoanalyst, but that seems pathological to me. Which is what's called reaction formation. Reaction formation is a defense where you put up the very opposite of what you are. So a community that is obsessed with apologetics, don't think that that's a community that has certainty. My goodness, no. Go to the Amish. They're pretty certain. They probably don't do any reading of apologetics, right? If you're reading a lot of apologetics, it's generally a symptom that you are actually very uncertain, but you're not able to express that. So the reaction formation is the opposite. Someone who's very confident, they're always talking about how great they are, how great their job is, how great this is, how terrific they are, whatever. Often, what lies behind that is a profound unconscious self-hatred. But that's called reaction formation. That's a symptom. Now, again, we think the symptoms are the thing like a cancer we can cut out of our bodies. So like alcoholism. Alcoholism is a problem, so you try and resolve it, fix it, stop drinking. But if you don't work out that actually alcoholism is the solution to a problem, it's not a problem. The symptom is not a problem. The symptom is the solution to a problem. And you have to work out what the symptom is a solution for. The symptom is allowing you to continue to live, but probably in a world and an environment that is painful, like a job that you despise. The symptom is a way that keeps you going. It's the solution, so you get really bad headaches, or you get really angry with your spouse. You come home and you're always shouting at them. That's called deferral, where your anger is really directed at your boss, but you can't shout at your boss because you'll get fired. So you take your anger and you throw it somewhere else. And you throw it at someone who's not deserving of it. That's a defense mechanism. And we all do that. We all have defense mechanisms. They're useful to know. It's useful to come to know our own defenses. Denial is obviously a big defense, especially with alcoholism, where you say, I'm not an alcoholic. And you go like, well, denial is what everybody says. If you're not an alcoholic and someone asks you, are you an alcoholic? You're going to say, no, I'm not an alcoholic. Is that denial? And you go, oh, that's what an alcoholic would say. Well, I'm definitely not an alcoholic. Oh, well, that's definitely what an alcoholic would say. Right? But denial is slightly different. Denial is when you deny something you're not asked. So denial is when someone says, oh, we should probably get a few more drinks for this party. There's a lot of people coming. I'll go down to the off-license and get some. I'm not an alcoholic or anything. I never asked if you were. Why are you telling me you're not an alcoholic? I never asked. Right? That's denial, because the person is probably not telling you they're not an alcoholic. They're telling themselves. So they're using you to tell themselves something. We have these different defense mechanisms. And if you solve alcoholism, as in you just get rid of the symptom, but you don't look at the problem that causes it, you're going to take up something worse, something much more horrific, something terrifying. Have you ever heard of CrossFit? Right? I've seen it. Honestly, I've seen this firsthand. One day you're drinking too much, the next day you're flipping tires. It's terrifying, right? You never get the Irish doing that. We used to stick with the alcohol. But you can take up another symptom. Maybe it's a useful, better symptom, but it's still potentially a symptom that is telling you something that you cannot bear to listen to. So what part of what we need to do in our lives, part of what probably brought you here, is eventually we have to listen to our symptoms. And Lacan, who's a theorist that I like, he wrote symptom in the old-fashioned way. There's symptom, which is this suffering. You suffer from your symptom. It's the problem that you want to get rid of. But if you change how you look at it, and you say, hold on, maybe my symptom is the solution to a problem. My headaches are telling me that I'm in a terrible relationship. My bad back is telling me that I need to get out of my job. My inability to sleep is telling me that I have unresolved issues from some friendships 5-10 years ago, right? Then it becomes a symptom, but spelt differently, S-I-N-T-H-O-M-E, right? Which is the French way. This is an old French word, symptôme. Symptôme. And symptôme sounds exactly like symptôme, which is holy man. So symptôme, symptom, symptôme, holy man, right? So your symptom is a holy man. Your symptom is a prophet. If you listen to your symptom will lead you to truth. What happens if you don't listen to a prophet? You're screwed, right? But if you do listen to a prophet and you repent, which means change your ways, You kind of are brought into green and pleasant pastures. That's the idea of a prophet. Your symptom is a type of prophet. If you refuse to listen to it, then it'll probably end up in disaster. But if you can listen to your symptom, and it's very difficult to do, because we invest so much energy in not listening to ourselves. It's incredible. But if you listen to your symptom, it can tell you a problem in your life that you need to look at, you need to work through. And if you're able to do the work, the symptom diminishes and you can live better. Think of it like New Year's resolutions is a good example. One of the issues with New Year's resolutions, of course, is we all break them. It's difficult because we go like, oh, I'm terrible. Like, I drink too much, I don't exercise enough, I eat too much, I eat bad food, or something like that. Typical New Year's resolutions, right? Now, if I was to write a book on New Year's resolutions, the first chapter would be, don't like a book on healthy eating or something. First is don't do it. Don't healthy eat. Ask yourself why you're not. Or ask yourself, if you feel that you should be eating healthy, or if you feel you should be exercising more, if you feel that you should be doing kind of like some practice like yoga or something more, but you're not doing it, don't try to do it. First step is just ask yourself why you're not. Now, let's take one example. You might discover that actually that voice that's telling you that you should eat better and exercise more is really the voice of your parents or your society that you've internalized. So this demand to eat better and exercise more is not really what you want to do. You think you want to do it, but actually it's this other voice within you. So many of us do not desire what we desire. We end up doing jobs that actually, weirdly, our mother or father would like us to have done. And I mean, a lot of people go into analysis because we realize we don't desire our desires. We find that I'm doing this job, but actually part of me just wants to go off and be an artist. So why am I doing this? Oh, maybe I'm trying to please an internalized voice that was from somewhere else that I've internalized as kind of like oppressing me. So the first step is you might go, oh yeah, actually, that's an external voice. And then you realize that your lack of exercise and maybe that you not eating healthily is your protest against that voice. It's your legitimate protest. Good on you. You're protesting against that voice that has colonized your being, that is telling you you have to be something, and you're not conscious of it, but unconsciously you don't like it. You're fighting against it. Hence, you'll always sabotage yourself. We always sabotage ourselves. So then what's the next step? The next step is exorcism, getting rid of that voice, removing that voice. We're going to come back to exorcism hopefully later. We need to, remind me. We remove this voice, right? You get rid of the voice. So now you don't have to eat healthier or exercise more. There's no voice telling you to do that. But here's the weird paradox. Now that you can eat healthier and exercise more, because the obstacle to doing that is the very thing that's causing you to do it. Remove the obstacle and you remove the desire to protest against the obstacle. So if you want to exercise more and eat healthier, you will. It's a weird thing to get your head around, right? The inner voice, I should exercise more and eat healthier. The protest against that is stopping you. You get rid of the voice, and therefore you go, I don't need to eat healthier. I don't need to exercise. I don't need to do yoga. I don't need to do any of that. So I don't need to protest against it. So therefore I can do it if I want. There you go. So that's a kind of an analytic way of thinking about desire. It's the same thing as, like, think about someone who's sleeping around a lot. They're going out, they're having one-night stands, they feel guilty about it. Oh, what would my parents think? What would my friends think? I feel awful about this. And sometimes the first step is to go, no, don't feel guilty, right? You want to do that, you're a growing adult, you want to do that. Let's work through the guilt. Let's work through all of the obstacles that are telling you shouldn't do that. And then you work through all of them. And often what happens is that the obstacle, as it disappears, so does the desire to transgress the obstacle. As you stop feeling guilty about sleeping around, the desire to sleep around also disappears. So this is what's called grace, by the way. Grace is the name we give to accepting that you don't have to do anything, that weirdly allows you to change. So that's the mechanism that I've just explained, is that the very mechanism that says you do not have to obey this voice, this thing, this demand to do stuff, the very act of accepting that you're accepted, which is the definition of grace Tillich uses, to accept that you're accepted, to accept that you don't have to change. Not that I'm okay and you're okay and that's okay. It's that I'm not okay, you're definitely not okay, but that's okay. Right? It's like the AA thing, right? You're an alcoholic, you're this, you're that. You experience the grace of acceptance. You don't have to change. And then as the obstacle goes down, so does your ability to change. That's grace. Okay, so some of you are here because you were even heavily involved, maybe conservative evangelical church. You had all of the answers, you had the truth, you had all of that. But then something in your bodies spoke of doubt and unknowing and all of that. Something stopped working. Symptoms started to arise. Now, what I want to do is just take 10 minutes and just around the tables that you are, I just love you to kind of go, if any of that resonates with you, talk about it. Like, an example would be, like, what was it that was telling you that you, I'm sure most of you are in this place, to embrace doubt, complexity, ambiguity? What began to crack things apart? What stopped working? What was the thing that started to speak the truth that you could not speak? What were the symptoms in your life? And also, maybe what are the symptoms that are currently in your life? Do you suffer from insomnia? Do you suffer from bad backs, chronic fatigue? Sometimes chronic fatigue is just, Freud said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, right? Sometimes chronic fatigue is chronic fatigue, biological, right? Sometimes it's not. Sometimes forgetfulness is just forgetfulness. Sometimes it's not. Recently, my housemate asked me to go to a coffee shop to meet him. I looked at the coffee shop, the name of it was 45 minutes away. Like, great, 45 minutes away. Could have chosen somewhere closer. I get there. I order food. I don't usually order food at coffee shops. I order $20 worth of stuff. And then at that precise moment, I go, hold on a second. Why would he, my housemate, choose to go to a place 45 minutes away from where we live? Maybe there's another coffee shop with the same name that's close. I look it up. Of course there is. It's LA, and there's another coffee shop right around the corner. So I'm like, okay, let's listen to this. Let's not just assume it's nothing. Do I not want to see him? Is there an issue that we haven't resolved? Because it's weird how the moments that I paid for the food, as in the moment I couldn't just get up and leave, right? Is the moment that I went, oh, I wonder if there's another coffee shop. Why did I not think that on the way? Why did I not think that at the start? It's not dumb. So maybe that's telling me that I'm actually don't want to see him. And then I thought about it, and yeah, I felt, okay, there's actually some stuff we need to talk about. And that forgetfulness was actually telling me something that I could not tell myself. If every time you forget the keys when you're about to see your mum, right? You know, it doesn't just happen once. It's just weirdly you always can't find the keys. Maybe you don't want to see your mum. And that's the interesting, very difficult struggle we have, is how to listen to our symptoms. So just, 10 minutes to talk about what does that mean to you? What symptoms in your life? You don't have to get that personal or whatever. You can also talk about the symptoms in your religious life, the things that started to happen which made you see that you were repressing something, that this was no longer working for you. So just 10 minutes, just have a chat. You don't have to all do it, but just somebody, and then I want to hear back some of your symptoms. I want to hear that stuff. See, everything I've said, and it can sound complicated, or it can sound like, if I said everything very simply, then there'd be no reason to take a whole day of your time, and I wouldn't be able to charge you as much, so it would be a disaster. So I'm saying a lot of stuff, but you can say these in very basic ways. Oscar Wilde says, there's only one thing worse than not getting what you want. It's getting what you want. There you go. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking very simply about the idea that we hide from ourselves our anxieties. We hide from ourselves our suffering and our pain. Often, this is called resistance. Not always, but we have a tendency to do that. We are incredibly good at hiding all of this chaos in our lives, but we're never successful at it. When you do that, symptoms arise. The symptom is the return of the repressed. It's the return of what you cannot face. It is speaking the truth that you cannot speak, the truth that is in you but that you're trying to avoid. On this, by the way, this is one of the reasons why I find the question of what do you believe so bizarre, right? Genuinely bizarre. And I think it would be good to feel that. Like there was a guy wanted me on his podcast recently, and he said, Pete, the problem with you is nobody knows what you believe. They read your books, they go to a whole day, and at the end they might go, oh, I enjoyed that. And then their friend says, what was it about? I have no idea. Well, what does Peter believe? I don't know. So he says, I want you to come on my podcast, and I want you to tell me what you believe, and I'm not going to let you weasel out of it. So I'm like, okay, I'm very happy to do that. I'm really happy to do that. But I'll tell you right now what I'll say is, I believe that I don't know what I believe, right? So, in other words, my consciousness is a defense mechanism generally to protect me from looking at what I really believe, right? That to come to know what you believe is an incredibly difficult thing. It takes years. You know, you might believe that you're successful and great and wonderful, but actually you hate yourself. It takes you years to see it. You might think that everybody of the opposite sex hates you. Now, of course, you don't believe that consciously. That would be a ridiculous thing to believe, but you believe it. It would be ridiculous to believe that a duvet cover, you call it, I say this and no one knows what I'm talking about. What's a duvet cover in America? You got that word. You got that? You got duvet? I was told off the other day for saying it. Duvet cover. No one here believes that a duvet cover can protect you from knife attacks or make you invisible to intruders, right? But you do, right? As soon as you hear some noise downstairs, suddenly your magical thinking, the duvet cover is somehow going to protect you, right? You believe it. You just don't know you believe it. You don't believe in ghosts or monsters until the lights are out and you hear a creak under the bed and you have to look under the bed, or it's inside the airing cupboard and you have to creep over and look inside the airing cupboard. You don't believe in ghosts, but you do. You just don't know you believe in ghosts. This is interesting because, you know, in contemporary atheism, new atheism, kind of the boring atheism, there's some good, really good atheism out there. I do atheism for Lent, where we read the great atheistic critiques for Lent. It's not to judge them, to let them judge us. But anyway, some new atheists will say, right, people have magical thinking, right? They think magically. But underneath that, the world is rational, right? The world makes sense. So yeah, you believe in fairies and ghosts and goblins and angels and demons and all of that, but beneath that, you know, the world is sensible, ordered, cause and effect, whatever. But interestingly, both Nietzsche and Marx both said it's the other way around. Their critique of new atheism was, that type of thinking was, no. The problem for us today is we think we're rational and all of that, but beneath all of our rationality, we have all of this magical thinking going on, right? I was in a group, a secular group in Belfast, and I was doing a talk, and I started off the talk by saying, okay, who here believes in angels and demons, gods and devils? Virtually nobody. A few people remember, but virtually nobody. So you don't believe in any of that stuff? No. You don't believe in any of this weird, you know, goblins or fairies at the bottom of the garden or anything like that? You're materialist, right? Yes. Great. Okay. Well then, I want you to get a picture of someone you love on your mobile phone, right? You know, it might well work if you've got teenagers. You'll find out why in a second. But you know, if it's a young kid or whatever, you know, someone you love, that's great. And then I took out a piece of paper, and on the piece of paper was this 16th century satanic curse, right? The satanic curse basically is a way to curse somebody to make sure disaster befalls them. And you have to have something that reminds you of the person. So I'm like, okay, can somebody come up and say this curse over, you know, the loved one on the phone? Because, you know, you need to think about him. And it's like, there's nobody moving. I'm like, I'm not telling you what I believe. I'm telling you what you believe. I just checked it out, and you don't believe any of this stuff. You want to read this? And one of my friends who's there, who, you know, is a very secular guy, I'm like, will you do it? And he's like, no way. And I said, why? And I thought he'd say, because my wife would kill me or something like that. But he said, oh, no, no, no. I says, I don't like to do that. Like, words have power, right? Now, this is Belfast. This isn't LA, right, where people do believe that. This is Belfast. None of us believe that. So, and I know he definitely doesn't. If I'd said to him the other night, words have power, if you say something terrible, it will happen on the other side of the world, he would have laughed at that. He wouldn't believe that at all. Most of Northern Irish humour is slagging each other off. If we believed words had power, my goodness, we're cursing each other all the time. So I said, say it over me. This is the hour I thought he would do it. I said, just say the curse over me. And he's like, no, I won't do it. That's called rationalization. Rationalization is where he felt uneasy, and so his mind rushed to find a reason to justify his uneasiness. Now, the argument I was making, and by the way, like I was saying, I'll say it over myself. Some curse that I found on the internet and changed a few words to make it sound more sinister. That's going to do anything. It's ridiculous, right? But that's magical thinking. The people who can often think they're not magical thinking. We have magical thinking going on all the time. We're just not aware of it. And this is why I talk about atheism is not atheistic enough. It's called a fetish. A fetish is an object we know is not magical, but we treat it as if it is. Money can be a fetish. We know it's not a magical thing, but we treat it as if it's magical. That car, we know it's not magical, but we treat it as if it is, like it's going to fix everything. It's going to make everything good. We have lots of magical objects in the world. And my argument is actually we have to get rid of that magical thinking. There was an experiment. Oh, no. I could talk for months, so I can't. I have to stop myself from going off in various directions. But the part of the point of saying that is, like, the people in that room didn't realize they still believed in a bizarre type of God, right? Now, the experiment, I'll mention it very quickly. I think it was in Finland. They got a group of atheists and a group of theists to say negative statements, neutral statements, and positive statements, evoking God, and then some not evoking God. The evoking God ones, a positive would be, I pray, I hope that God blesses my family. And a neutral would be, glasses help you see better. And a negative is, I hope that God kills everybody I love in a horrible fire, right? They were actually worse than that. They were really specific. I feel bad even saying it. They're really specific. And what they found, they wired everybody up, they found that atheists and theists both had the same level of anxiety and stress over evoking God to do terrible things to their families and their friends. And it wasn't connected with just saying terrible things, because when people said, I hope my family dies in a fire, the stress level was less than the evoking of God, right? So what they discovered is that these theists and these atheists both unconsciously still seem to believe in some sort of, supernatural being. Now, you might think, oh, the theists are more consistent, but I'm not sure, because if you have a belief in God, where if you say to God, oh, I wish you would kill my family in a fire, God would be like, that's a bizarre thing to ask for, but yeah, sure. If that's what you want, So that's a superstitious view of the divine that I don't think any of the participants would believe in. And if they did, I think that's the problem. But the point is, unconsciously they do. And if you don't confront your unconscious beliefs, they continue to act. In Northern Ireland, we kind of feel we're post-sectarian in many ways, but when there's job problems, whenever there's unemployment, whenever there's a lack of money, you realize that the sectarianism is still there. It hasn't been dealt with. It still kind of rises to the surface. All of that to say, we don't often know what we believe. Second of all, by the way, your beliefs, you may also, three things people say is, one is, I know what I believe. Two, my belief coheres with reality. And three, I want to talk about my beliefs and get other people to, maybe agree with me, right? But first one, no, I don't think I know. I don't think I'm transparent to myself. I don't think I really know what I believe. Sometimes I'm the last person to know what I believe. Secondly, I don't necessarily think that my beliefs cohere with reality. So you might believe the duvet cover will protect you from knife attacks, but you don't think that coheres with reality. You go like, yeah, I have that belief, because why do I have that belief? Because when I hear somebody coming, I put it over my head as if that's going to do some good. But I don't think that's right. So secondly, your beliefs don't necessarily need to cohere with reality. And thirdly, you don't necessarily want to propagate your beliefs. Some of us have the craziest, most terrible, dark, horrible beliefs. The last thing we want to do is throw them out there, Northern Ireland, I believe all Catholics are a little bit devious, right? Like, I don't want to spread that around. That's terrible. I want to get rid of that belief. I definitely don't want to go onto someone's podcast and talk about what I believe and get people to believe them as well. We have bizarre beliefs. And they start off when you're a kid, but what you learn is you learn to repress certain beliefs that are weird, which means you cover over them, you hide them with rationality, but they still continue to function. And so anyway, all I'd say, it's instead of Christianity as a set of beliefs is a bit weird. For me, Christianity is partly about exposing the beliefs that we have but we cannot face, right? That's what you see with the Pharisees. That's what you see Jesus often doing. Jesus is not telling people what to believe. He's drawing up to the surface the beliefs that are already existing, but people aren't looking at. Right? You go into a therapist and you have a dream where your brother is drowning, and you're behind a sheet of glass. You can't do anything about it. You talk about this dream to your therapist. Well, what does the therapist say? Well, maybe they'll say, well, you felt awful. Yes, I felt terrible. You couldn't do anything. No, my brother was dying. I couldn't do anything. Well, it is your dream. Like, this isn't reality. Your brother wasn't really drowning in a lake. You put your brother there. And you put the glass sheet between you and your brother. This is your dream. It's not my dream. This is your dream. Maybe you wanted your brother to drown. Because, of course, I didn't want my brother to drown. I love my brother. Are you sure? I love my... Are you sure? Actually, I really hate him. You know, he destroyed my toys when I was a kid. But you don't even realize it yourself. So your truth comes out in your dream. And only as you listen to the dream do you begin to encounter the truth. And that's the symptom. So I'd like to hear like somebody who has a good example of the symptom speaking to them, and maybe them ignoring the symptom and then having to listen to the symptom. Maybe it's a religious symptom. Maybe it was kind of just to concretize this abstract conversation. Anybody want to kind of talk about how a symptom arose in their life that kind of like told them the truth, that really they were full of doubt and question, unknowing, told them what they were denying? Anybody want to raise their hand? There's one. We're going to take a mic to you. I just want to hear a concrete example.
Okay, so I'm Haley, and throughout my 20s and early 30s, I would describe myself as very flighty or flaky, that I was always doing something new. I always had a new project and a new thing I wanted to do, and there was I had this sense when I would reflect on that, like, oh wow, I'm so flaky, and that's part of why I shouldn't really try to do anything important, because I'll probably just quit. And eventually, I had this experience where I realized that it started to break down, and I realized that part of why the symptom, the problem, I'm trying to remember the way you phrased it, but the symptom was the flakiness, and the protest was against the idea that I could not pursue what I really want to do, which was become an ordained minister. And so I didn't know that I had that voice that was saying, you can't do that. So I protested against it by trying a whole bunch of other stuff. That was interesting and whatever, but it wasn't the thing I was supposed to be doing. And so once that voice went away, then I stuck with it. I have been in seminary for the last 3 years, and since I also have 4 kids, it'll be like 10 more years before I'm done. So I'm really going to stick with it. And that's my story.
Very good. Yes, that's true. Yeah, so our flaky, like if you know people who are fly by night, they're always trying a million different things, and they're always whatever. Sometimes, yeah, that can be a symptom that that's a way of protecting themselves from really doing something they want to do. It's a symptom that's telling them they fear failure. Potentially, they feel a desire and a fear of failure and whatever. But yeah, that flakiness can be a symptom. Very good. Anybody else got an example? Just quickly. Oh, we got one. There you go. Sorry.
No, for me, I was raised with I'm Seth. I was raised with some pretty intense poverty and deep poverty mentalities. We had my small little storefront Pentecostal church with a reading of scripture that affirmed that God only likes poor people. Now, of course, the whole church was there was a repressed desire where everybody wanted to be rich, so we rail against the rich people, right? And so, you know, anybody walks in with a pair of shoes that's too nice, you kind of crack away at them, and they leave, right? So we, you know, it becomes this kind of echo chamber, and as I got older, you know, once I got to the point, that kind of midlife crisis space in my early 30s where like I can't be poor anymore. And it shows that when my kids were born, it really showed up. It's like, oh crap, you know what I mean? Like I can handle not having a lot, but you know, I want to give my kids something better. But it was one of those things where I don't want to just give them the same thing I was given. So it began, the symptom was this kind of poverty that I was living in, paycheck to paycheck, no sense of purpose or desire or anything that I wanted to do with my life. But then what happened was this kind of, the question of like, you know, how do I get over this? I had this God standing in the way, right? This thing saying, you can't do this in order to please me. You know, you must kind of continue to live this way. And then I had to actually bring that into the conscious and recognize the character of that God. And I was doing it against my religious understanding that God loves me. So I've been going, and I remember in this tearful thing, finally realizing, just turning to that God going, don't you have a lot of money? Like, you've got a lot. Yeah. Like, if my dad was a trillionaire and I asked him for a few $100, I think he'd give it to me. You know, and it was just like, and it was railing against my construct in a sense. You know what I mean? And then because of turning to that, honestly, then the construct kind of started to reveal itself more, and this new level kind of emerged of, well, maybe that's not, maybe I made that, you know what I mean? And then there's this kind of falling apart of that next level, and then the next thing emerges underneath it, and this, like, I don't know, it's kind of like you're talking about, I actually went into that middle space in that experience. In a very body experience. I mean, a lot of coughing and puking and things like that. It was a fascinating experience, but it was the emergence of all that unconscious construct. Right.
Yeah, a perfect example is sometimes the things that we hate actually show us what we love. You know, things that we, you know, like if we hate certain wealthy people or something like that, that can often actually show a reaction formation that that's really what we desire. There was an interesting phrase, the one political comment I'll make today, maybe more, I don't know, but there was a phrase, I think the Hillary campaign used it, which is love trumps hate. The funny thing is, I read it totally in a Freudian way, because I was like, because in one sense, there's some people who love trumps hate, as in there's a real libidinal pleasure in enjoying the hatred of Trump and of certain people. Like, you see it, this frenetic enjoyment of the enemy, you know? And that sometimes can, so it's not like love trumps hate. It's, we love Trump's hate. This is brilliant. This is fantastic. This is so much fun. I'm sharing so much stuff. I'm passionate. I'm having great conversations. There's a libidinal investment in it. Now, the only problem with that is partly then in a sense as a scapegoat. Because if you're doing that with an enemy, you've got an enemy who then becomes a personification of all evil and bad. What can happen is you can fall into what's called the beautiful soul. And the beautiful soul is where you feel pure and good and innocent because the other takes on all of your darkness and badness and problems. So you love the hate. You love the enemy. But the problem with that is then it means you need them because you're libidinally invested in having them. So weirdly, unconsciously, you would miss having them. You have to kind of, in one sense, disinvest your libidinal energy into the scapegoat mechanism, and then you can actually, you know, make a real change. You can really kind of do something. But I mean, maybe this is an example. Think about it as, you know, these reality TV shows, right? There's two types of viewers. There are the people who watch it naively, like they want to be the Kardashians, they want to have the gold mobile phone, they want to have the gold toilet and all of that. And then there's the ironic viewers who watch it because they find it so funny that there's people who actually want to be like that, right? There's actually people who think that this is good, okay? Now, the interesting thing is, from a marketing perspective, both those viewers show up exactly the same way. Right? They both show up as viewing figures. They both contribute to the TV program. And technically, you could have a reality TV program in which there is no naive viewer at all. Everybody is a postmodern, ironic viewer, laughing at a fictional, naive viewer. I think this with some reality TV shows, that they're so bad that they're literally almost entirely viewed by people who watch them to feel superior to a non-existent group of people who watch non-ironically. But the difference is, the point is, you are maintaining the TV show. Think about ideology as, and our world as a machine that requires batteries. We are the batteries. Our libidinal energy is the battery, right? So the system works not because of what you think or don't think. It works because your libidinal energy is invested in it. So the true political protest is to take your libidinal energy out of the system. Right? That's what I think, that's the radical move of the contemplative tradition is, by the way. I think the radical move of the contemplative tradition is they are trying to, through a series of practices, remove their libidinal energy from the system, both love and hate, and just kind of like indifference to the system. But the issue is, as you do that, the TV show, if people stop watching the TV show, they'll take it off the air. So the way to get rid of the TV show is to take enough libidinal energy out of the TV show. So in some respects, what we hate is part of the problem and all of that. Anyway, just wanted to mention that. Does that make sense? I don't know. Right, now I have spent a good bit of time looking at this issue, looking at it. And the thing I want you to think about, because we're going to now talk about Christianity. What has this got to do with Christianity? Well, I mentioned briefly that there are some religions of the pleasure principle. They are religions that promise you certainty, wholeness, completeness. You can have what you want. They might be secular religions. They might be sacred religions. But there are religions of the pleasure principle. And there are religions of the reality principle. Religions that invite you to disattach, to remove yourself from society, from the world, from frenetic desire, to remove yourself completely. Now, interestingly, I think Western religions tend towards pleasure principle. Eastern religions tend towards reality principle, and there's exceptions to both. So it's not that you can't simply slot them in. But but if you look at like forms of Buddhism and Hinduism, they tend to be less pleasure principally and more reality principally. And if you look at, Christianity, it looks, and Islam, stuff like that, they look like they can tend towards more pleasure principally kind of thing. I think the best of them don't do it, but the worst of them do. And the problem I'm trying to outline is, if you go with what I've said, is that neither of these will work. That's the problem. We live in the in-between. We live in anxiety and with this nothingness, with doubt, all of this stuff. We live in this in-between. And inauthenticity is the attempt to deny that in some way, the attempt to escape that in some way. And for many of us, it's escaping to the pleasure principle. Give us the right answers. Tell me the truth. But I had a friend, by the way, he was depressed, very smart guy, and he went to the reality principle. He, for a year, just watched Stargate on TV. That was pretty much all he did, Stargate. And he watched not just Stargate, but he watched every spin-off show, because I think there was a pile of spin-off shows, right? He watched all of the spin-off shows, all of them. And I asked him, do you like it? He said, no, not really. I'm like, okay, so he didn't even like Stargate. Wasn't interested in Stargate, but it was kind of almost like this lived protest against the meaningless, about life. He's like, life is totally meaningless. So I watched one episode of Stargate, so I just gave myself to watching every episode of Stargate for no apparent reason. That is, in a sense, trying to escape out of life, to not take responsibility for life, to kind of just go, it's utterly arbitrary. So that's nihilism and hedonism. Hedonism is, pleasure principle. Nihilism is reality principle. But obviously he was deeply depressed, didn't really work very well, and he had to choose, what TV show. But anyway, we live in the in-between. There are religions of the pleasure principle and the reality principle. We have experienced those in our lives. In fact, we often experience both simultaneously in the Western world. You go to your meditation on a Wednesday night that allows you to be refreshed so you can re-engage with the frenetic pursuit of consumerism and your job. Now, we don't have to use Zen Buddhism or something like that, but often in our society, that's what we do. We kind of go to reality principle. We kind of like relax. Holidays are a version of that. 2 weeks away, just relax, get completely out of the system, and then so as you can re-engage with it in a refreshed way. So we kind of can oscillate between these two. But our Christianity has often been this idea of the pleasure principle. God is this object that will fix us, make us whole, make us complete, give us the answers. The Bible will give us all of that, right? But I want to argue, no. Christianity is not a religion of the pleasure principle. It's not a religion of the reality principle. It is, in Kierkegaard's words, the religion of the absurd. Right? Tertullian once said, I believe in the crucifixion of the Son of God because it is absurd. Right? So, now, one of the things that everybody agrees with almost is that that's completely rubbish. Right? On one side, there are people who go, Christianity is absurd, and that's why you shouldn't believe. And at the other end, there are people who say, Christianity is not absurd, and that's why you should believe. But very few people are saying Christianity is absurd, and that's the reason to believe, right? That's the weird one, right? Why would you believe in? That's like saying, I believe in square triangles, and then someone says, well, that's absurd. You go, exactly, that's why I believe in it. Like, that's bizarre. That is not a reason to believe something because it's absurd. That's a reason not to believe something. But the absurd has a very precise definition. Camus, I think, said it very clearly. The absurd is the experience of living in the world where we live between what we want and what we are, who we are and who we'd like to be, between having to act and not knowing how to act. That was Camus' one, the third one really, is that you live in a world where you have to act, but you don't know how to act. That's absurd. It's absurd because it doesn't make sense. You can't get the answers. You live with anxiety. That's the absurd. The absurd basically defines our human predicament, the human predicament of being in the in-between that I've expressed this morning. That's the absurd, living in the in-between. What has all this got to do with Christianity? The story of Adam and Eve, the very first story in the Bible, I think articulates everything we've been talking about here. If I have anything to contribute to theology, it's this reading of the Adam and Eve. Right? Adam and Eve can be read as a Jewish Oedipal story. Remember I said Oedipus wants to sleep with his mother, the father is in the way, he breaks through, sleeps with the mother, thinks it's going to be wonderful, but it's a curse. Right? That is the pleasure principle, the pleasure, the object, the mother he wants. The reality principle is in the way. He thinks if he breaks through reality, it'll be wonderful. He breaks through the reality principle, it's terrible. Well, it's structurally very similar to the story of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve are walking around the garden. They then have this prohibition. Bam, you can't eat of that fruit of that tree. Right? Go, whoa, that's the prohibition. Then they have this serpent that has a voice that says, what did God really say? Like, if you eat of that fruit, you will become like God, right? What does to become like God mean? Well, that means to lack the lack. That means to be whole and complete, because God traditionally is the one who lacks the lack, the one who is whole and complete. So the voice, you shall be like God, is saying, you eat that piece of fruit and you will be whole and complete, right? You'll be like God, right? Adam and Eve break through the prohibition, the reality principle. They embrace the piece of fruit. They think it's going to be a blessing, but it's a curse. That's the creation story of psychoanalysis. The child, separated from the primary caregiver, wants to return to that. But if they return to it, it would be a disaster. But of course, the other side is if you don't break through reality principle, you're depressed. Oh, I could be a rock star, but look at this. I'm stuck in this dead-end job. You've got reality principle, but you're imagining something wonderful you could have had. So we're in this dilemma. The Garden of Eden captures that beautifully. I say, existentially captures the human condition very powerfully. And it has an additional element that's very important. And it's the serpent. The serpent is this voice that says you can be whole and complete if only you have that. If only you have that. In psychoanalysis, that's called the superego. The superego is the voice that's inside you but is not you, that says you have to do X, Y, and Z and then you'll be good, right? And often the superego injunction today in America is not you should be nicer to your mum. It's you need to be having a better time. You need to be having more fun. You should have more friends. You should be out more. It's this demand to be happy, the demand of tyranny. So on a Friday night, you're sitting in watching Netflix and you've got this voice saying, what are you doing watching Netflix? You should be out having a great time, meeting new people. You should be having more sex. You should be having more fun, right? That's the superego injunction today. That's like and in theology, it's called the serpent. The serpent is the internal, external voice. The internal voice is you but not you, that says you have to do X, Y, and Z and then everything will be great, right? Now, interestingly, if you read that, then you go, well, a lot of what we do in the church is a form of kind of Satanism in a sense. If the voice is saying you have to do X, Y, and Z, and then you will be whole and complete, if that's the serpent, then that voice, anyone who tells you that you have to do X, Y, and Z, you have to read the Bible more, you have to, do this, you have to do that, you have to go to my conferences, you have to buy my books. That's an exception, by the way. You do have to do that. That will bring wholeness and completeness. But anything that says that voice, theologically, is the serpent. Psychoanalytically, is the superego. In psychoanalysis, the cure is basically when you weaken the superego so you realize you don't have to obey that voice. That's part of the cure in psychoanalysis, right? The cure in theology is exorcism, when you get rid of that voice, when you're able to extract it from your being. In psychoanalysis, the technology that helps you do that is the couch, transference, resistance, that technique. In theology, the technology is liturgy. The technology to do exorcism is a liturgical structure. And the ultimate word, grace. Grace is the name you give to the realization that you don't have to do what that voice tells you. The thing that says, if only you do X, Y, and Z, then you'll be whole and complete, everything will be fixed. Grace is the technology in Christianity that basically does the exorcism, gets rid of that voice that's within you, right? It's all there in this founding story of Judaism. Now, this is something that happens when we're young. How does this voice get inside us? Well, in one sense, think about it like when you're a kid and you're doing stuff, your parents shout at you, tell you not to do it. It's an external authority, right? It's an external authority you have to obey because your parents are stronger than you, right? But then over time, your parents use little devices. Sometimes there's a thing called Elf on the Shelf, I think, which watches your kids when you're not around or whatever. It's always watching you. What you do eventually, that external voice becomes internalized. And as that external voice is internalized, then it colonizes your being. This is why, Zizek, a philosopher I like, talks about the difference between a traditional family and a liberal family. Traditional family says to their kid, Johnny, you got to go see your granny. Johnny's like, I don't want to see my granny. She's cold, she's wrinkly, I don't want to do it, right? And the parents, traditional parents, Johnny, get your coat on, get in the car, you're going to see granny, right? Now we fast forward to liberal parents. Johnny, you got to go see granny. I don't want to see granny, she's wrinkly and cold, right? I don't want to see, I want to play my Xbox. Johnny, sit down. You know you make your granny happy, don't you? You know she loves you seeing you, and you want to do the right thing, don't you? You want to see granny. You want to make her happy because you're a good boy, right? That's even worse, because not only does little Johnny have to go and see granny, he has to like it, right? At the first kid, little Johnny can go, I have to go and see my granny, but when I'm old enough, I can rebel. But now this child has no rebellion because they have to like their own tyranny. And of course, it's all the guys anyway, because if little Johnny listens and then goes, yeah, it's okay, I'll just play the Xbox, you know the parents are going to go back to stage one. Johnny, get your coat, get in the car, you're going to see granny, right? But that is the internalization of voice. That's totally fine, that's what we all do. But the voice is external, but then we internalize voices. We become our own police officers. Zizek has a very funny reading of the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. He says, this is brilliant. This is God saying, let's be fundamentalists, let's be inerrantists, let's be literalists. God is saying, you shall have no other gods before me, right? In other words, in front of me. Yeah, of course, be discreet. Go have other gods. Have a great time. Go have a blast. Just don't do it in front of me. Just do it discreetly. It's the parent who says, you can't get drunk in this house. What's the unsaid thing? Don't get drunk. Of course, have a good time. You've got to do that. You've got to spread your wings. But we've got to keep we've got to keep kind of like decorum. We have to kind of pretend the lie. But how depressing is it for the father who realizes his son isn't going out and getting drunk, that his son's actually doing what he wants him to do? That's terrible. That's awful, right? So the reason why I say that is, at first, there is the external, which actually is more freeing, because you don't have to obey it. You've got little places of protest. But when that external prohibition, that external voice is internalized, you have nowhere to run. So in LA, the serpent is everywhere. There is a voice saying, have a good time. Every party, it's like, have a great time, have a great time. You go to a party in LA, and it's like everybody's having such a great time. It's like, wow, it's amazing. It's like, oh, it's fantastic. And everybody's like so happy. It's like, oh. Now, that's fine. That's fine. I can go along with that. Yeah, it's brilliant, right? But you have to have the bathroom you go to go, poof, right? To escape the tyranny of all of that, right? Don't believe it. It's all rubbish. Everybody's depressed, right? You turned off the music and got everybody to look at each other for 2 minutes. Everybody would be crying, right? So everybody's depressed, but the problem is, if that external voice, have a good time, if that's inside you, you can't go to the bathroom to escape it. It's in the bathroom. That's where they're all doing cocaine. There's nowhere to go to escape the voice, because the voice is inside you. Exorcism, for me, is kind of, in a sense, the technology, it is the pulling out of that internal voice that's the opposite of grace, that's always demanding things of you. And of course, the problem for us is, but why would we change? If we didn't obey the serpent, if we didn't obey the superego, if we didn't obey that internal voice, that's the voice that's telling us how to be happy. If we didn't obey it, we'll be depressed. We have to obey it. Well, no. It's obeying that voice that makes you unhappy, that gives you symptoms, that is destructive, that creates scapegoats. This is all political as well, because this is individual, but actually it's political. Whole countries that cannot look at their darkness will put it onto Muslims, will put it onto immigrants, will put it onto another. Splitting is a defense mechanism where we cannot look at our own pain, so we split the world into good and evil. My partner is evil and terrible and bad. They hurt me so much. I hate them. That's fine. That's a defense mechanism that is okay, because you're defending yourself against pain that you might not be able to handle. But over time, that defense mechanism causes more suffering than it relieves. And over time, you have to let that defense mechanism go down and go, well, okay, maybe it wasn't all their fault. Maybe some of it was my fault. And as you get rid of splitting, which is purifying the world into good and bad, as you do that, you may still say it's mostly their fault, right? That's fine. It might legitimately be mostly their fault. But you still get to the point where your world is not split into goodies and baddies, right? And then novelty arises. Novelty is very important. War is not conflict. Dylan Moran, an Irish comedian, said this: war is not conflict. War is the inability to have conflict, right? So you do a war because you cannot stand to listen to the other person. You cannot stand to engage with them. You cannot stand to listen to them, so you want to kill them. Right? War is the inability to have conflict. If you can cope with conflict, you don't necessarily go to war. Now, splitting is war. Splitting is goodies and baddies. And in the war, if someone starts saying, well, there's something about the Germans that they're not all bad, you'll find yourself in prison, because splitting does not allow for ambiguity. There was a family whose son was killed. And it's in this book, Why Do I Do That? This psychoanalyst uses this example. Their child was killed by some drug gang. And they were seeking vengeance in the courts. They were seeking to get the people who killed their son put away. Right? One of their friends said, listen, you got to realize your son was also part of that gang. Your son, was part of all of this. They could not cope with that. They shunned that person. They got rid of them because their son was good, was pure. Their son was innocent. Until they all went through the courts, person was put in prison. Over time, they were able to break down the splitting and go, well, I suppose our son was, partly involved in that as well. And when they were able to do that, they were able to reconcile with their friend, who was probably an idiot for saying what they said, right? But the point is, the splitting is there because of a genuine pain, a genuine suffering, and that has to be acknowledged. The main problem with it is not moral. Forget about the moral thing. Defense mechanisms, we all have them. It's not moral or immoral. The main problem with splitting is novelty cannot appear. Novelty means the incoming of something new. Right? When two people are at war, there's just black and white. When it begins to get a bit grey, you can begin to negotiate. You can begin to think of solutions. You can begin to maneuver. But novelty means the incoming of something that you won't expect. But splitting kind of causes that thing. And why am I saying this, by the way? Where was I? Serpent, exorcism, splitting. Why am I saying splitting? It'll come back to me. This is why you need to stay awake, because you have to help me keep back and keep on course. And we only have 15 minutes, so don't worry, it'll get out soon. Splitting, exorcism, taking that out, lowering our defense. Oh, yeah, grace. Oh, yeah, because if you think, if we obey, here we go. If we obey that voice, we'll be happy, but obeying the voice is the problem. Then you go like, what if I stop? And I accept this grace, this offensive thing called grace, which basically is the exorcism of this inner voice, is telling our society, or telling us, our community, that we have to be perfect. We do this, we'll be perfect. If only X, Y, and Z, right? Then nothing will change. It'll be terrible. But actually, it's grace that allows for change. That was the example I was using before. Like in AA is a perfect example. In AA, the first thing you have to do is just be honest with yourself. There's no 12 steps. Forget the 12 steps. The first thing you do in AA is simply acknowledge who you are and what you're doing. Oh, my name is Pete and I'm an alcoholic, right? You're getting the false narrative you tell yourself about yourself. I'm not an alcoholic. I could give up any time I want. It's not a problem. And you're making it fit with reality. You're being honest in a community of grace that accepts you for who you are. And you can sit there for months and not say anything. You just go around and you can just skip. But eventually you'll say your name, you'll say you're an alcoholic, and nobody will judge you, nobody will tell you to change, nobody will do any of that. Generally, people will just go, yep, I know how you feel. And that's grace. The acceptance that you're accepted. Oh, and by the way, that's the two parts. You can have grace, but you don't accept it. You can be accepted by a community, but not accept the acceptance. Right? It might take years. It might take years of going to AA before you can accept the acceptance. Right? But there might be a point in your life when you begin to accept the acceptance, that you're okay or you're not okay, and that's okay. You're there in that room. Then you've got 12 steps. Then you've got, here's some practical stuff that might help, that we've found useful over time, that you can do, and some of it's very hardcore and all of that. From what I know, I've never been, but and you got a question? No, sorry, I thought you were. That's good. Okay. If anybody has a comment, you can put your hand up. But the 12 steps is not really where the change happens. The change happens in the acceptance that you're accepted, that you realize you don't have to change. And then you can begin to do something. So grace is weirdly this mechanism in which, in the very stopping of something, you can begin to make a change. So so I'll finish with this now, a couple of questions. This is the forgiveness of sin. Right? Anybody who's thinking this theologically, this is why I'm a big believer in original sin. I'm a big Calvinist. I'm a big, you're all terrible, right? No, is that simply, very simply, sin for me is a name for lack. That's all it is. It's not about chewing gum and going out with girls who do or anything like that. It's ontologically, philosophically, it's the word for lack. Separation. Separation. That's it. Don't think moral at all. Right? Sin is separation. Original sin means original separation, i.e., there is an original lack that's part of being human. Now, of course, I'm not talking how they talk in churches. This is not, I'm using existentialism here. But I think that there's a really key insight here, which is to be human is to experience a lack, right? So that's the ontological dimension of sin, which is basically at the core of our human beings, there is a lack. Don't think ethical, don't think moral, nothing like that. It is a philosophical, theological category. There's a gap, and I've explained what I think that is. There's an ontic dimension, which is then that connects, that sense of lack connects with something. I go, if only I had enough money, then I'd fill that lack. If only there weren't any immigrants in our country, then we'd be fine. If only we build that wall and keep the baddies out, then it will be fine, right? There is then this general sense of lack connects with something concrete in the world. And then the moral is the third element. The moral comes in a sense of you will destroy yourself, or you will destroy others, or you will destroy the environment in order to fill that lack. That for me is the moral dimension of sin, is any activity you do to frantically fill the lack in your being. Right? And so, for example, this is the death drive. This is why you can say human beings are very the problem is not selfishness. Often the problem is selflessness. In other words, zombies are selfless. Zombies will keep attacking you even if you shoot them. You shoot them. The alien in Aliens, I'm doing a discussion on Prometheus in a few weeks in New York. I'm very excited about it. The alien in Aliens is the personification of this selflessness. The alien will keep coming at you whether you shoot it or whatever, right? There is this weird thing, like Ayn Rand says, we're selfish. And you know what? If we can make that work for the world, brilliant. You selfishly go after what you want, and that's good. But actually, the problem is we cannot be selfish sometimes. If you meet somebody who's very wealthy, and they've got $20 million, $100 million, if they were selfish, they'd stop, and they'd enjoy it, right? But some people keep pursuing more and more to the detriment of their health, to the detriment of their family, to the detriment of their well-being, and they know it. It's not that they don't know it. It's like then they die and their kids enjoy the money. Or someone who wants fame and they get an album, but then they have to produce another one and win another award. And if they were selfish, they'd stop. Hey, just buy the house in Malibu, go swim, right? But they can't. That's called the death drive, is a perverse selflessness. In a sense of, it's a really weird thing where we destroy ourselves. Where you keep going out with people who hurt you. And not only do you keep going out with people who hurt you, you want it. As in, why do you do it, right? You realize that, oh yeah, if this person doesn't treat me with disdain, I find myself doing things that will make them treat me with disdain. Or I find myself not being attracted to them. Now, that's not bad or good. That sometimes tells us that there is something we have to work through. That there's something in us that is destroying us. Now, you can, by the way, end up going out with someone who hurts you, and you don't want that, and who's disdainful, or who's an alcoholic, or whatever, and that's different. But sometimes we find ourselves just being attracted to assholes, right? It's not that we just find ourselves by mistake going out with an asshole. We find ourselves actually kind of not being attracted to the people who are nice, but only being attracted to the people who aren't. Then we have to ask ourselves, why am I hurting myself? Why am I destroying? That's the perverse death drive. To be human, we can often hurt ourselves, pursue things that we know will destroy us, that kill us, and hurt other people. But it's the frenetic pursuit of trying to fill this lack. That is what I think original sin means. And in the church, often people talk about the payment of debt. Because remember, debt is lack. Debt is a lack of something. To pay the debt is to fill it. But I think Christianity says we have to forgive the debt, which means you don't fill it, you don't pay it, you render it nothing. The nothingness that is something, the lack that you experience in your life that's so painful and destructive often and causes all this anxiety and all this pain, we have to somehow make peace with it. We have to forgive it. Make peace with that. So in other words, it's not about being whole and complete. It's about being at peace with our brokenness, our fracturedness, our not at oneness with ourselves. And when we can do that, that can cause genuine transformation in individuals, in whole communities, and in whole societies. Okay, any questions or thoughts in the last 5 minutes on that? And then we'll take off in the afternoon. Yep, here's one. Do you want to? Oh yeah, here's a microphone will come to you, as if by magic.
My name's Roy.
Hey, Roy.
Is being at peace with our brokenness a form of reconciliation?
That's good. You know, so I'm always worried about words like reconciliation or harmony or peace, but actually not because of those words in themselves, but sometimes what they connote. Because in some respects, I want to say, yes, we're reconciled with our lack of reconciliation. It's dialectic. We are at peace in our conflicts. This is what Camus called the rebel, right? He said, basically, there's for him 3 figures. There is the revolutionary. The revolutionary wants to get rid of the pain of the world, of them in themselves, in their relationship, or in the world, by creating a new world, a utopia, right? The revolutionary imagines a new world without pain, suffering, whatever, right? Now, the problem is, the revolutionary either never gets that world, or they get it, and it's not as good as they imagined, right? They often get killed. Revolutionaries, when they get their new utopia, are often the first people to get, killed. So there's a revolutionary who wants to resolve the antagonism by creating a new world. Perfect relationship. LA, people go from one relationship to the next. It's incredible, as if the perfect relationship will be out there. The other side is the conservative. For Camus, Camus says the conservative tries to get rid of the antagonism of existence by conserving the world it is. Let's not try and change the world. Let's find the way it is. Let's try and conserve the world as it is. If we try to create a new world, it's probably going to be worse than the world we're in. So they try to resolve the antagonism by staying where they are. Camus has this 3rd figure, and it's the rebel. Now, who is the rebel? The rebel is Marlon Brando in, is it Rebel Without a Cause? Who, was that? The Wild Ones. Yes, it's the Wild Ones. Marlon Brando's the Wild Ones, I always forget. And Marlon Brando, he's part of the Black Motorcycle Club, whatever. He's asked by this waitress, what are you rebelling against? And Marlon Brando says, what do you got? Right? That's the rebel. So for Camus, the rebel is the person who is like the revolutionary. The rebel and the revolutionary look pretty much the same, right? Because the rebel is always moving forward, always dissatisfied, always trying to make changes in society, make things better. So they're very different from the conservative. But what differs them from the revolutionary is the rebel enjoys their dissatisfaction. They are satisfied in their dissatisfaction. They find pleasure in not getting what they want. There's actually a very good book called On Not Getting What You Want. I think it's called Not Getting What You Want. It's a clever title, and it's about this. The rebel enjoys not getting their utopia. What they have done is they have found peace and reconciliation in a sense, always moving forward, always changing. So the difference is this. Doubt, for example, is something that people are often afraid of at first in church. That's something that's bad. And we either try to fix it with certainty, or, we try and fix it with certainty, I guess, or we just live with it as a necessary evil or as a test of God, right? The difference for me is not that you get rid of doubt, you just change your stance towards it. You enjoy it. Doubt becomes something that is wonderful. That means you've still got so much more to learn, that you can engage critically with people, that you can think and all of that. So you haven't got rid of doubt. You've simply changed your stance towards it. That's what I think reconciliation means. And it's not reconciliation as in the revolutionary. You're reconciled because you find this perfect peace. R.I.P., rest in peace. You get that when you're dead. Or who tries to get rid of it by conserving. I think the rebel is the figure of reconciliation in Christianity.